Well, every blessing to you all, and welcome back to another Walking Talking Pulpit video. I was asked if my dating was correct concerning how long since I've last produced a video like this from this particular route, and I checked and it was 2019, so 4 years from this particular route. Yes, I did a handful during 2020, but that was from a different location. I was also asked about some of the footage which we used during our last video as to whether or not it was from my Walking Talking Pulpit, and the answer is no. We found some great footage online, royalty free, copyright free, and it matched perfectly with the topic at hand. Well, I thought I would slightly change track to what I looked at last time, discussed last time, and if you care to know, it's around 1 degrees Celsius, no sun today unfortunately, but it's very dry, not overly windy, so as I would say from my open air pulpit, perfect recording weather. I've always wanted to give people credit where credit is due. The Apostle Paul says, give honour to whom honour is due, and many times some of the greats haven't always been Christians. I think back to World War II, and I think about someone like Goering, and Goering, not Hermann Goering, who we've all heard of, but Albert Goering was a real thorn in the side of the Gestapo. And Albert Goering was a very brave man, he really was, and he was very kind and gracious to many Jews, and he'd find himself being arrested on many occasions, taken to the local police station, and the Gestapo thought, good, we finally got him this time. They hated him, and on one occasion he was arrested by a junior officer who had no idea who he was and he was being detained, not tortured, but they would have loved to have done so, and they said to him, before we start the interrogation process, they had the old thumb screws ready. Of course, the Third Reich copied the Jesuits. In fact, people like Himmler tried to base the Gestapo on the Jesuits. Of course, Heinrich Himmler was a Roman Catholic and had plans to be a priest, as would Adolf Hitler. Well, during the arrest of Albert, this young officer was ready to work him over, get the old thumb screws out, put you on the rack, as it were. You go back through the Inquisition days, brutal stuff, just sadists. In fact, some years ago we hoped to visit one of the remaining prison camps in Spain. I think they've got what's left of it in Madrid. Wasn't possible at that time to visit such a place, but maybe one day we will. I think we need to remember just how cruel and vindictive and ferocious the Catholic Church have been. They've been able to reinvent themselves over the years, of course. Well, Albert was arrested on one occasion, and this young Gestapo officer couldn't believe his luck, and he said to this chap, probably Catholic born, as was his brother Herman. I think from memory Herman was Catholic born, but never repented, and was visited by an American chaplain who tried to witness to Herman, but got nowhere. And yet that same officer was able to reach out to people like Ribbentrop and others and get them saved. In fact, on top of that, as a quick footnote, many Japanese criminals were also given the gospel before they died. So it does show that even at the 11th hour, those that have lived awful lives, wicked lives, could still be saved. So there's never it's never too late, it's never hopeless to get unsaved people saved. But back to Albert, before I digress too much. He found himself being arrested. He'd been helping out Jewish people, like many, and they caught him. This was the beginning of his many occasions of being arrested for doing the right thing. Even Martin Luther King, the old apostate, would say it's always the right time to do the right thing, and that's very true. Well, they sat down, started to interrogate him, and they said to him, can we just check what your name is first of all? And he said, Goering. And the officer's face just went pale white, and he said, and how do you spell that? And he said, Goring. And they started to whisper to each other, nudge nudge, and they said, is your brother Herman? And he said, yes, absolutely. Of course, Herman was number 2 during the Third Reich, and panic started to set in, and phone calls were made, pieces of paper were passed around, phone calls were made, and they quietly released him. They couldn't touch him, untouchable. What a brave guy. After the war, when Israel became a state again, prophesied that she would back in the Old Testament, in many places they named streets after Albert. I mean, Albert took a real risk. He could have been arrested, sent to the gulags, so on and so forth. And there's that wonderful quote towards the end of Albert's life when he was arrested again, and this time they thought they had him, and they phoned up Herman. In fact, I believe letters were sent between Heinrich Himmler to Adolf Hitler what to do about Albert Goering. And there's that famous quote from Herman, who said, based on his own driver being accused of being a Jew, and he said, I get to decide who is a Jew. Slight paraphrase, but it's a wonderful quote. And as time passed by and reprieves were offered and charges were dropped, they couldn't touch him. Herman loved Albert, looking out for him, and of course Albert, I think from memory, outlived the war by a good number of years. Of course Herman would poison himself, but what a hero. What a hero. I mean, could have just gone along with the majority. Nearly everyone in Germany was pro-Hitler. All men of a particular age, fighting age, were conscripted. The vast majority believed in the fatherland, and you would have had to have probably held them back from enlisting. That of course is nationalism, a great belief in Germany. Well, like I say, after the war, Albert passed away, but streets were named after him in Israel, and to this day he's seen as a great hero. I mean, he really is. You think about parts of Paris, parts of France, they've got streets named after Roosevelt and Churchill for liberating France. You see, every country in France, or every country in Europe just surrendered to the Third Reich. Humiliating. I think the French had, what, 2 million in their army, and 2 million men just laid down their weapons, just surrendered to the Third Reich. Well, anyway, for me, he's worthy of respect, Albert. Was he saved? I don't think so. His brother certainly wasn't, but he did the right thing. He went against the majority position. Now, over the last couple of years, we've seen a handful of people step up, say the right thing, do the right thing. To my surprise, I found myself very impressed with the Kennedy, and I know a thing or two about the Kennedy family, and I know all about Joe Kennedy Sr. and his bootlegging days working with people like Al Capone, and how people like Joe Kennedy Sr. hated Protestant Britain. And when he was the ambassador in England, London, the US ambassador, he was writing notes back to people like FDR and the Secretary of State at the time, whose name escapes me, and the Defence Secretary, basically saying that Britain was washed up, that she couldn't survive the war. And he was quietly rubbing his hands with glee, because of course Britain is a great Protestant nation. We gave the world the greatest book ever penned. Well, we put that book out, we sent it all over the world, and of course Protestant America financed it. And that's why your best preachers, probably 95%, have been American. And that's how it's always worked over the years. You've had countries like Israel, the Jews penning the original autographs, the English translating it into the AV 1611, and of course the Americans, like I say, financing missionaries all over the world. Well, it's interesting, if not fascinating actually, when I think about someone like Joe Kennedy, a papal knight, a real Catholic through and through, a very immoral man, had many mistresses. It's been said he even had a relationship with Jackie Kennedy after John Kennedy was of course assassinated in Dallas. Well, anyway, it's fascinating to see someone like Robert Kennedy Jr., a brilliant brain, a lawyer by trade, standing up over the last couple of years, speaking the truth, and the left not really knowing how to handle him. He's got the magic name, you see. His father would have been the next American president. I think that's pretty fair to say. He was running against Nixon back in '68, came very near, and he too was taken out. The 1960s was a very dark decade for American history. People were shot down dead, Luther King, Malcolm X, the Kennedy brothers, so on and so forth. So to see someone like Robert Kennedy, a Roman Catholic by birth, today he's not a Catholic, he's not a practicing Catholic, he is a New Ager, so prayers for him. He's doing great work, tremendous work in fact, and he wrote a book recently about Fauci, another Roman Catholic, and I haven't read the book, but I've seen some of the reviews and it's absolutely devastating. Incredibly, that book has hit the #1 bestseller in the US at the moment. It's had no publicity from the mainstream media. The media moguls, for the most part, are pushing the agenda, and I thought to myself it would be very interesting when we get past this recent, or we get through this particular time period and things start to return, quote unquote, to the new normal. What they call it, the Great Reset, which I may discuss during another Walking Talking Pulpit video. It will be interesting if somebody takes the media to task, takes out a private prosecution against such people. It's certainly possible. How it would work, I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. But they've been whipping up the frenzy over the last couple of years, as were the media in Nazi Germany and also in Japan and elsewhere. But to see someone like Robert Kennedy Jr. speaking up, speaking the truth, again, doing the right thing, paying a huge price for it, is someone who is worthy of honour. Is he saved? No, like I say, like Albert Goering, raised a Catholic, but as of right now is a lost man, but doing great work. And I think all these people are worthy of respect. Well, it may have been a week or two ago I came across a movie / documentary about a Romanian woman who I'm ashamed to say I'd never heard of. We all know about people like Richard Wurmbrand, an incredibly brave Romanian pastor who spent years being tortured for Christ, wrote that famous book, Tortured for Christ, and was locked up, detained suffered excruciating pain, not just physical but mental. And of course his wife was also incarcerated. They broke her ribs on one occasion, pushed her into freezing water, freezing ocean, almost died, but they came through it. My only criticism of someone like Wurmbrand was that he was ecumenical, would wear a dog collar and would go on all these TV shows in America, so on and so forth. But I think he probably was saved, but like so many decent people, compromised and mixed with the wrong types of people. Well, everyone knows about Richard Wurmbrand, and if you don't know about him, look him up online. A remarkable man, stood his ground, never compromised and never reneged, stood his ground, and he too is worthy of honour. Well, I came across someone who I've never heard of, a lady called Nicole Grusu. I hope I pronounced it correctly. And this woman was arrested in 1949 by the Romanian secret police, communist of course, and they held her for 4 years. 4 years. They started by beating her, took her shoes off, took her socks off, beat the palms of her feet, incredibly painful, no marks of course, would force her to walk up and down her tiny cell, 6x4, while she was eating her food, couldn't sit down. When she slept, she had to face a particular way, and if they caught her sleeping another way, they get her up and throw freezing cold water over her. During her long periods of interrogation, she was punished by a very simple and yet profound method. And what they would say to her is from 6 AM until 10 PM you walk back and forth in your cell. I mean, picture that if you can. 6 till 10, 2-3 days on a row. I mean, it's just mind-boggling really, who comes up with such ideas, going back to the Jesuits, the Dominicans, the Franciscans. It's like a circle, isn't it? Well, after weeks of trying to interrogate her to give the names of those whom she had worked with before her arrest in 1949, they realised they were getting nowhere with Nicole, and they said to themselves, we need to transfer her to the common prison. But during her time in her tiny cell, somewhere in the capital, Bucharest is it, she carved a psalm on the wall, which I cannot remember, and after she was released and sent off into general population, a lady was detained and put into the same cell, and she'd been the mistress of a minister in the Romanian secret police, the Romanian government, and she read that inscription. We'll say Psalm 23 for argument's sake, but it's not Psalm 23, another beautiful psalm, and she read it day and night, she memorized it. And there's a wonderful scene in this movie towards the end where Nicole and the sisters, and when I say sisters, they really were sisters, she got nearly everybody saved in her prison cell. An astounding achievement. Well, during this occasion they're all breaking rocks at this quarry, and this woman gets thrown into the quarry with these women, and of course she's shot. She'd been out the night before, and within minutes she's gone from being somebody to being nobody. But towards the end of the film, Nicole this is, starts to recite this particular psalm, and the other lady completes it. Wonderful scene. And she said, how do you know that psalm? And she said, well, I was held at such and such centre, like a gulag basically. You see, what really annoys me as a student of history is that we all know about the Nazi death camps. Of course, fascism is another form of Catholicism, but of course you haven't heard much about the communist death camps, prison camps, the gulags, because of course communism is atheism, it's socialism, and the media moguls over the last probably 100 years or so have all been on the left, incredibly. Well, she says to Nicole, well, when I was being detained, tortured, interrogated, as you all seem to have been through the same system as I have, I found this inscription on the wall and it helped me so much. Of course, it's a wonderful scene, and it just shows you that during those dark days of living in Romania, 1949, people were getting saved. Well, by 1953, 4 years later, Nicole has led many women to the Lord. She was Orthodox by birth, so an example of somebody being saved in spite of their church, not because of their church. And she's released in 54, and she would live until 1996. Died in France, Paris, was repatriated back to Romania, was buried there, and she is there until this day. She should be, as far as I'm concerned, on par with people like Rosa Parks or Emily Pankhurst or Winnie Mandela. And those women, incidentally, I'm not speaking in favour of. At least one out of the three, in fact 2 out of the 3 were terrorists. If you study Pankhurst and Mandela, they were terrorists, but they're known, they are famous, they're on the left, you see. But someone like Nicole Grusu did the right thing at the right time, took a stand. And I watch these films and I read accounts about people such as that, and it puts me to shame. I'm not going to condemn someone for not speaking out over the last couple of years. That's not what this is about. Who knows how I would have handled things had I been detained in 1949 and held for 4 years, or someone like Richard Wurmbrand held for 15 years. Who knows how we would have handled it? Pulling out your toenails, your fingernails, listening to recordings of women being whipped, beaten, raped, having to hear that stuff 24/7. I mean, that term, man's inhumanity towards man, is so incredible. It's profound, and it really is so. Well, around the late 1960s, the leader of Romania, Ceausescu, would visit the UK and talk about apostasy, would meet the Queen, Prince Philip, and the red carpet was rolled out for Ceausescu. And I think he even went in an open carriage down to the palace. It was almost a state visit. And here's a woman, the Queen of England, head of the Church of England, says she's a Christian, rubbing elbows with Ceausescu, one of the most evil men of all time, knowing that Christian men and women are being murdered in Romania, didn't say a word. I know politicians have to work with each other, of course, but when you've got somebody who is the head of state of the church, or the official church, the official religion in the UK, I mean, it's incredible, isn't it? You go back to 20 years ago when the Chinese leader came to the UK, may have been Xing Zhang, forget the guy's name, and he came to England and they gave him a red carpet treatment, state visit basically. And of course, so many people in China are being tortured all the time. Not only Christians, but also Muslims. And Prince Charles said, I won't attend the banquets because of this guy's human rights record, so on and so forth. And he got a lot of stick for that, Charles. But he wouldn't go further than that and speak out against Islamic terrorism around the world. So let's try and pull all these stories together, allow me to wrap up and say this, that yes, it's true that it's always the right time to do the right thing. There have been some heroes over the last couple of years who have really taken a stand, and God always appreciates that, those that do righteousness. That's found over in Acts chapter 10. But of course that won't save you. You have to seek out the truth. Of course Christ is the truth, and if you seek out for the truth will find you and you'll be saved. There'll be many people like Albert Goering and others who have done the right thing, took a chance, arriving at the great white throne judgment, and of course perishing, never saved, temporarily took a stand, went against the majority. But of course, if you know your Bible, you know that it's always been the minority that have done the right thing. Noah's family, 8 souls out of what, 500,000? One family do the right thing, build a boat, board it, are saved physically, and of course spiritually. The majority not interested, rub along with the world like today. The majority still wearing masks. Of course a mask means mark, same sort of a thing, but not quite. So I'll say this also, shapes, types and shadows, I should say, types and shadows are very good, but be careful not to build doctrines on such. I'm working through Psalm 49 at the moment, and I counted that Christ used, I think, 53 parables. Now a parable is a riddle. A riddle isn't doctrine. So be careful if you work through the 4 Gospels, especially the synoptics, and you come across those parables, not to make doctrine. Oh, we'll get doctrine from such a parable. It's a general truth. It's a moral. It's a riddle, and a story is being told to explain a real moral. But it's always been the minority. Starts with Noah, like I say. Jump over to Acts chapter 1. You've got 120 people around. 120 people in the upper room. Christ would heal thousands, preach to tens of thousands, perhaps 500,000, who knows. Would feed, what, 20,000, 5,000, 4,000. I mean, add up the figures. You've got the 5,000. That of course only includes men. Add the women and the children, you get 20,000. Or the 4,000, again only including men. Throw women and children in, you got what, 15,000. Maybe in total. Jesus came into contact with what, 500,000 people, spoke to them, had some interaction with them. I mean, we've been giving out tracts for over 20 years now, and I think it was 5 or 6 years ago we took a guess as to how many tracts we've given out to people, and we think it was around 1 million. So we've had contact with 1 million people in 20 years. Incredible, really. Only a tiny minority will of course get saved, but contact was made with what, 1 million people, or even 500,000, a real conservative figure, but I'm going to say at least 1 million people have taken tracts from us. Jesus would have contact with maybe 500,000 of the apostles who came after him and would travel the Roman Empire, and he went into the millions of course, but Acts chapter 1, 120 people. That's it. So it's always been the minority that have done the right thing. Bobby Kennedy took a stand, spoke out, was ostracized by his own family, the media. Although he's on the left, as are they, they're still calling him the town idiot. In fact, I saw a clip a few days ago, Whoopi Goldberg, and she even called him the town idiot. I thought you wouldn't say that to his face, would you, Whoopi? If he was in the studio with her and her friends from, is it The View? It's called The View. Trashy TV show which really attacks men. like in the UK, there's a program called Loose Women. Never seen it, but they attack men, use filthy language. And I thought to myself, if you had Kennedy in the studio, a Harvard-trained lawyer, a very high IQ, he'd wipe the floor with those women. Easy target, you see. Well, Nicole Grusso, I think it's Grusso, was a remarkable woman, and I'll discuss her more when I exegete the 2 Psalms. That really helped her a lot. When she was growing up, her mother would read the Psalms to her. Those early years are really critical. If you have children or grandchildren, and of course if you're saved, teach them the Bible. Put those words of God into the minds of those young children. She wasn't bitter, she wasn't angry, but what a remarkable woman. There's a scene in this movie which was made probably back in 2010. It was made in Romanian but dubbed into English. Not a great dub, I should say, but well worth watching. And during this very powerful scene, the prison officers are looking for supervisors, as they were called, and the job of a supervisor was to basically whip your women into line. These same people were used in the fascist camps in Nazi Europe, and of course you had the Jews predominantly held, but also socialists, Catholics to some extent, Protestants absolutely, gypsies, homosexuals, so on and so forth. But they used these supervisors, and the role of the supervisor was to whip the people into line. They were hated like traitors. After World War II, if you'd been a woman who had relations with German officers, in France especially, they shaved your hair off. You were humiliated, and some got a public thrashing, physical thrashing, a whipping. But during this movie, the prison officers, communist, atheists, like I say, followers of Charles Darwin, evolution, you understand of course, and yet even Darwin, as I've already proven, got saved before he died, would renounce the nonsense of evolution. And during this movie, some of these supervisors are dropping down dead basically. I mean, it's back-breaking work. You work in the quarries 12 hours a day, 5-6 days a week, with your bare hands, opening your wounds every day, blood always pouring out, using rags as gloves. And this lady steps forward and she says to the officer, like a brown noser, as we would say, sucking up to him basically, "I'll be a supervisor." And all the ladies sort of roll their eyes, and Nicole looks the other way. I thought, what a wonderful picture of contempt, absolute contempt, like working with the enemy. And I thought to myself, that's a great picture of church leaders today working with the state, going along with the madness of these mandates, the madness of lockdowns, the madness of separating friends and family, the madness of not allowing loved ones to bury their dead. Just infuriates me. And this lady says, "I'll be a supervisor." And old Nicole, seen it all before, done 4 years. Doesn't say anything of course, but her facial expressions are just incredible really. And she says to the police officer, or the prison officer I should say, that please speak up for me, and if you can, help me to get out of this place quicker. I want to get out. I hate this place. Which is what Joseph said back in Genesis of course, but Joseph didn't sell out. And they sort of do a deal with her basically, and she takes over the role as being supervisor. And maybe a few months later she realizes that she's going nowhere. She did a deal with the devil, as it were, and once she realized she wasn't going anywhere, she hung herself. Powerful scene, very powerful scene. We haven't seen that kind of suffering in this country for, I can't even think when, really. I mean, we haven't been invaded since 1066. And yet next month the EU are again discussing making the vax mandatory. And I discussed that during my last walking, talking pulpit message. And we are still praying for our family in Europe. There must be some who belong to Christ who haven't bowed the knee to Baal. Places like Australia, New Zealand have just lost the plot. There are a good number of Christians in Australia that I know, brothers and sisters, and I'm praying for you, so stay strong and the Lord will bless you. I know He will. Canada has also gone just insane, and I know a few Christians in Canada, and I'm praying for you too, so stand strong. But the reality is that if you're looking for a hero or a heroine, there'll be just a handful of people stepping up. It's always been that way. Most people want to take the easy way out. It's not my job to condemn such people, but nor would I commend such people. In time to come, when the history books are written, we'll see who is victor and who is villain. The victor and the villain. Villain. Albert Goering, brave man, remarkable man, could have been shot for his treason, quote unquote, against the Third Reich. Took a chance, saved many Jews, was hugely rewarded by the Jews in Israel. Robert Kennedy, not necessarily the same thing, but it's similar. Speaking up for those who have had horrendous, irreversible side effects, those that have been tricked, coerced into taking the shot, which, like I said last time, almost mirrors the mark, but not quite. The mask wearing, to my embarrassment, I did wear a mask for a while during, let's see now, 2020 to 2021 or thereabouts. Of course, I realised that that too was mental conditioning, psychological conditioning. We all saw the clips of Nancy Pelosi getting her hair done, no mask. We've seen clips of Biden going to restaurants, no mask. We've seen many clips of Boris out and about, and his previous health secretary in and out of Downing Street, being driven around in his chauffeur driven car, not wearing a mask. And of course Trump barely wore a mask. They know that the whole thing isn't what they've told us it is. Boris having all these parties at Downing Street, rave-ups, it's just incredible. And you can be sure of this, that if he was having a party or two, and the last figure was over 20, others were also enjoying themselves. Fauci, another one, seen on camera more than one occasion. When he sees the cameras rolling, puts the old mask on. When the cameras stop rolling, off goes the mask. Such hypocrites. Such hypocrites. You're being deceived, people. They are taking you as a fool. They see you as a fool. They are conditioning you and your children and your grandchildren for the Great Tribulation. Even Rand Paul has done some great work over the last couple of years, has grilled Fauci like no one else has been able to do. But even Rand Paul, an Episcopalian, has got ties and connections with Big Pharma. I was sent a video to watch about his business arrangements with Big Pharma. Incredible. Talk about a hypocrite. And he's now saying that we, I guess he means the American people, need to get the next vax ready because these current vaxes are no good. He too is playing along with this insanity. But it's not all doom and gloom. There is hope. And of course, the blessed hope is what we all look forward to, of course. And there is hope in different parts of the world at the moment. but it's left a very bad taste in my mouth, I can tell you. And if you've had a chance to say something from your pulpits over the last couple of years and you said nothing, shame on you. Shame on you. It reminds me when John Bunyan was being detained in Bedfordshire, southern England. And old John was a Calvinist, but he had a great passion for the lost. He was a street preacher, and he was told by the bishop of his day, of his time, that he couldn't preach without a license, basically. And he said, I need to preach. There's no license found in scripture. Took a stand. Nobody else would, of course. And he spent 15 years in prison. 15 years. Almost the same as what Wormbrand would experience. In fact, I think it may have been 13 years, but it was many, many years. Over 10 years. Again, just one man. So, take heart, take heed at the same time. Don't allow yourself to be deceived any longer. At the same time, I'll say this also, start to wrap this message up. It's gone longer than I thought. It also feels a bit like the old Stockholm syndrome. Have you noticed that? I mean, we tell people the dangers of the shot, the PCR, the ART, all that stuff, the masking, isolation, all that stuff. These are methods that the Americans came up with, I think, just after World War II. Holding people in isolation, like Guantanamo Bay, for example, without a trial, torturing people who haven't even been prosecuted, or who haven't even been charged. You say, well, those people are terrorists. Well, they may well have been terrorists, but they may come for you next and your family and call you a terrorist. So be careful, people. We all do this, don't we? We all say, well, they're terrorists. They deserve to get what they're getting. Well, if they're terrorists, charge them. Charge them. Some of those people in Guantanamo Bay have been there over 15, 20 years. They come down to you one day. They may hold you. The state of Romania called Nicole a terrorist. And of course the Germans called people like Bonhoeffer and others terrorists. But I'm starting to wonder if this is like the old Stockholm syndrome. I don't know. Take the first shot, you feel sick. Take the second shot, go to the hospital. Take the third shot. Do you know, in Israel they're rolling out the fourth shot, and in Turkey the fifth shot. So there's a level of Stockholm syndrome. There's a spiritual spell all over the world at the moment, which I've already discussed previously, and this year will be make or break, I think, for many people who have been seduced, deceived, hoodwinked, gaslighted. I think when some of these people wake up, they won't go to sleep again. So I'm going to start to wrap up this message. It's a beautiful, cold, crisp day. There's more I could say about this, but I don't want to say too much. Sometimes too many words are not good. Sometimes fewer words are more powerful, more to the point, more relevant. If you want us to pray for you, please drop us a line. I've heard from some of you. I won't name you, of course, but if you want prayer, we'll pray for you. I don't want to condemn anybody, but I can't commend those of you which have gone along with the system, basically. You know who you are, you know what you've done. It's now down to you and the Lord to get things right. My focus now is on those of you which haven't bent the knee to Baal, who've taken a stand like Nicole would do in those demonic days in Romania, or someone like Albert would do in those demonic days in Germany, and today to some extent someone like Kennedy, but not quite. And also doctors and nurses have spoken out, and some have died suspiciously. You couldn't believe the censorship that we are experiencing the shadow banning that we are experiencing. You can't imagine it, the attacks, so on and so forth. So pray for us. We're praying for you. And by the grace of God, we'll get through this as a family.